You know, it's funny how we look at things. Driving to work each day, we tend to be oblivious to everything that surrounds us. And in fact, some of the things that surround us are quite beautiful and very unique and make us distinctive in the communities we live in. Sure, we know how to get to the coffee shop and get our morning paper, but along the way, are we missing some important aspects of our life? The aspects of our community? Community is very important to humans, particularly here in the United States, where we've worked hard to form binding communities. Now, communities are interesting because they have a distinctive history. They've had periods of growth and periods of stagnation. And I bet in almost any town in America you can find families related to the founding fathers that are still active in town affairs. It makes America a pretty unique place. The question before us is, what makes your community special? Now, driving to work, did you miss it? What happens if you're not the only one that misses that unique quality that makes your town distinctive from all others? And what happens if we become so immune to those interesting characteristics that when we start making decisions about aspects in town, that we lose those characteristics? You know, maybe a special use permit over here, or a small zoning change over there, or maybe just an inappropriate use of the lot we're standing on. Those small decisions can actually impact the quality of those characteristics that make us unique. And then we're just like other people. There's not any difference. Why live in this town? Well, those are the type of questions we want to look at, because the impact of those changes upon our unique qualities as a community are very important, and they're happening all the time. Now today, we're going to look at two communities. One is going through this decision-making process right now. The other one has already gone through it. And they came up with a way to preserve the past with an eye to the future. So I'll tell you what, we're going to investigate the town of Blackstone, Massachusetts, and the town of Slatersville, Rhode Island, to find out what makes each of these communities unique and how they're coping with change. Now, the first town we're going to take a look at is the town of Blackstone, and it's situated right on the Massachusetts-Rhode Island state line. And one of the decisions the town has to deal with is what to do with an 1836 church. Now, here in New England, we're blessed with having church steeples as a very predominant and noticeable characteristic of a New England landscape. It really is one of those qualities that separates New England from other parts of the country. And the town has to decide what to do with this church. But in order to understand why the church is important, you have to take a look back in history. So we're going to join up with Rangers Suzanne Buchanan and Jack Whitaker to learn about the history of the town of Blackstone.
Hi, this is Ranger Suzanne Buchanan from the Blackstone River Valley National Corridor, bringing you a Blackstone moment. Today we're in the town of Blackstone. Jack, I'd like to welcome you to Blackstone.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Suzanne. I know the Blackstone River and Blackstone Canal are just below us here, and this is the town of Blackstone. Did William Blackstone ever live here?
Good question, Jack. No, William Blackstone did not live here, though he passed through here, and we're just celebrating this year his 400th anniversary of William Blackstone. William Blackstone settled in the town of Cumberland. But since we're talking about anniversaries today also, the town of Blackstone is celebrating their 150th anniversary, for it became a town in 1845. So happy birthday, Blackstone.
What happened here before 1845?
Well, this property and the village was in the town of Mendon. And in 1845, Blackstone separated and became the official town of Blackstone, 1845. we have to pay tribute to the Blackstone Manufacturing Company, for their first mill was built here in 1809. And as they prospered, so came the canal, the railroad, and many mills. For the Blackstone Manufacturing Company had 5 mills by 1860. The church behind us, they built 1836. They built several schools and at least 60 mill houses for the workers that worked here in the town of Blackstone.
So that things were moving up the river pretty rapidly at that point.
Sure, things caught on. There was also another well-known manufacturing company in the town of Waterford Village here in Blackstone also.
What impact did the canal have on the town of Blackstone when that came through in the 1820s?
Right. When it came back through the town of Blackstone, 1828, it was great for the shipping industry, for they could transport their goods from Providence south, or they could transport north to Worcester. And with Blackstone being approximately halfway from Worcester to Providence, this was a good stopover.
Now, one of the interesting things about any canal, to me, would be the locks. And I understand there were 49 locks on the Blackstone. Were there any of them here in Blackstone?
Good question, Jack. Town of Blackstone had 9 locks here. You didn't need a key for them, though.
And the lock did what?
The lock enabled the canal boat to rise from one level to the next, passing over the dams and the incline of the river. Something, though, that's interesting, Jack, that right at the turn of the century, the town of Blackstone and the Blackstone Manufacturing Company had a bit of a tiff over taxes. And the whole Blackstone Manufacturing Company moved 1,000 feet across the river to the town in the state of Rhode Island, the town of North Smithfield in the state of Rhode Island. So the workers no longer worked here in Blackstone. They left the state of Rhode Island and went to work in North Smithfield. So the town of Blackstone is located halfway midpoint in the Heritage Corridor.
Which puts it in a very important point economically as well as historically.
Absolutely, Jack. Well, this has been Ranger Suzanne Buchanan bringing you a Blackstone moment.
And this is Jack Whitaker of the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor saying we'll see you around the valley.
One of the strongest and most enduring characteristics of the Blackstone River Valley is its industrial landscape. The Rhode Island system of manufacturing, where mill owners provided work, housing, stores, and community centers to its laborers and their families in return for paying out low wages and labor stability, is still very much in evidence. Just look around me. You'll see great examples of mill housing that date back to the 1820s. You see, there really is a special, unique character to mill villages. Mill villages are often places that today designers and planners try to recreate because they are made up of elements that make people feel comfortable. In the Blackstone Valley, mill villages were clustered settlements nestled along the valley bottom next to the river. The mill housing was one of the most noticeable characteristics of a mill village. They would range from very modest forms to more elaborate Victorian designs, but most resembled single-family homes and were arranged very rhythmically along a straight line. Both the scale and the repeating patterns made it very comfortable for people to live. There's a certain pride that can still be seen in these simple but pleasing houses. Although predominantly similar, families would individualize them by adding window boxes, picket fences, and other personal touches. Other elements of a typical mill village were the civic structures and places created for the mill worker population. Churches, libraries, town common, the company store are the underpinnings of these clustered villages and are all within walking distance of each other. Today, we don't begin to plan communities as efficiently as these. Just about everything you needed could be found, or once was, within the core industrial village. This pattern of community development and the unique industrial era resources are the foundation of the Blackstone Valley communities. It's easy to forget what makes a place special because as time goes on, we tend to take places in the community for granted. But these are the places that set us apart, making us special and building on our sense of community. I'm with Jesse Deacon, and we're here by the Federated Church. One of the oldest churches in the area. It was built back in 1836. And Jesse, was built by the mill, wasn't it?
That's right. The mill in 1836 built the church. Although it was not the first church building to be put on the common. The first was something called a vestry building. And it was a little building right back here beside the church along Church Street. And it doubled during the week as a school. There was no problem with church and state in those days. But in 1836, they did build this building. You know, my grandfather was a
Your
sexton
grandfather?
for a number of years. You know. I used to work with him, doing errands and so forth. I think the most impressive thing I can recall about having worked with him was the day after the 1938 hurricane, when we came up to assess the damage, and the steeple was right down through a gaping hole in the roof, down through the pews, down through the floor, and embedded in the dirt cellar.
You're kidding.
It was a terrible sight. But the congregation lived through it and put up another steeple, and it's here today. Yeah, helping my grandfather again. In those days, as the bearers brought the body, the casket, out of the sanctuary and loaded it into the hearse as it departed the area, we tolled the bell very slowly, and that was my job, tolling the bell for funerals, among other things around here.
Now, how big a boy were you at that time? Was that a big job to have to pull yourself up to?
Oh, no, that's pretty well balanced, that bell up in there in the belfry. No, I guess I might have been 10, 12, something like that. I also had another job in the church, which was I was a pumper. There was this huge organ built into the wall on the left side of the pulpit in the sanctuary, and the back side of that was a Sunday school room, and this had a closet door. You open the closet door, and it exposed this long pole-like handle for pumping, and that was attached to a huge bellows, which provided air for the organ. The problem came about when pumpers who sat there, we used to have a group of us who exchanged different Sundays to do the work, would either become engaged in reading or fall asleep sometimes, doze off. And Miss Maxon, who was the matronly organist, would pull this knob on the organ above the keyboard, and it touched off a flag that would wave and signaling that she needed more air in a hurry. And that kept the thing going.
Now, this church means a lot to the community, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
It was one of the aspects of in a mill village that the mill ownership would
right.
build certain, I guess, buildings to help with that community spirit.
Well, it was part of the paternal system of the time, yeah. Schools, buildings, libraries, which brings to thought the common that is here now. The original mill was down the hill here below us, and right tightly knit in that area was the mill housing. And then there was a bit of a caste system here, because on the hill higher than that, they built the overseer's houses, which is that long brick block over there. And they built a couple of townhouses. One was the parsonage, the other was the schoolmaster's house. But then, up the road a bit, where everything was clear, there were just the pastures of the mill farm and so forth, was the agent's house, something like the mill owner's house, which was a spacious mansion, which is still there today. But there was absolutely no housing from the overseer's block on up. That was a beautiful sight because it looked over the waterway that actually ran the mills, and the water wheels at the mills.
So, Jesse, there's a lot of community history wrapped up in this church, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is. It goes on and on, connected with the virtual serfdom of the early mill owners and their operation of New England mill villages. This was but one of several in the township, and the people who lived here, they worked long hours, late into the evening. There were complete family units. Child labor was rampant, and they had no reason to go to any other village. And that's the reason for the small stores, the company stores, the arcade that was built here, which was an early day Galleria as we know it today. All the supplies that they needed were available there. This went on for some period of years until the end of that era.
Well, Jesse, I want to thank you very much for allowing us to stop down here and talk with you a bit, and I hope we hear some good news about the church.
Well, I do too. I think it has a real future before it. I think one thing it's doing, it's pulling a great number of people together in the community, working toward a future for the church. Let's hope it works out.
Mom, raccoons!
Don't get too close. They might have rabies.
Raccoon rabies has reached Massachusetts. Protect your family from this deadly disease. Do not attract wild animals to your yard by providing food or shelter. Don't leave pet food outdoors. Vaccinate your pets yearly. Enjoy Massachusetts wildlife from a safe distance. For information, write rabies, Mass Division of Fisheries and Wildlife, Westboro, Massachusetts, 01581.
And Suzanne, welcome to my favorite part of the valley, Slatersville.
Thank you, Jack. Coming to Slatersville is like history in your own backyard. Tell me a little about this church behind us, Jack.
Well, actually, this is the first planned mill village in America. We know about Samuel Slater, or most people do, who brought technology from England to spin thread, but his younger brother John was brought over later, and John was a millwright, a man who built mills. And the old partnership of Almy, Brown, and Slater in Pawtucket sent John on a search for a place to build a mill so they could isolate a workforce, get away from the busy city of Pawtucket. And this is where he found his spot. There's a little dam down here and a little mill owned by a fellow named Buffum. And Almy, Brown, and Slater bought the mill and the water rights and the mill rights of this village. And then John Slater laid out the common, laid out the housing, laid out the position of the church, and the town was built.
So where would he have found the workers to come if he had made this a plan?
Well, like all the mills in the valley, your local farm families with 8, 9, 10 children had a surplus labor force. And this way they could get cash money. The younger children and the mother in the family could come to the mill and work. So you had local farmers would provide some of the workers. And I would not be at all surprised that Samuel Slater, with his mills in Pawtucket, and he has several at that point, probably brought some of his workforce up here to start the mill in operation. You remember that the mill here in Slatersville was built in 1806. The mill that's here today, just off to your left, was built in 1826. The original mill burned down. And when it was built, it was one of the biggest mills in New England. So that things were moving up the Blackstone Valley, and within a few years, within 1820s, Lowell was underway.
Getting back to my first question,
Okay.
Jack, tell me about the church.
All right. The original church planned by John Slater was built on this site. It was built in 1808, and then it was moved later. The whole meeting house was moved down the street here and was set up as a school. It was called School Street because of that. Then in years after that, they took that meeting house school and moved it again to this street, and it's right behind the present church. It's still there. It's a private home at this point, but you had the building moved twice to its present location. And one of the things that is unique about Slatersville is it was untouched. This village was owned by the Slater family for 100 years. And then a fellow named Hooper, a banker in Boston, bought it, did very little with it, and in 1915, a man named Kendall, the famous Kendall Mills, bought this village. And he restored many of the houses around the common here. And he owned it until the Kendall operation moved to the Carolinas in the 1940s. So what you had was a little pocket that was preserved. The world passed it by. Commercialism took place on the main road a mile up north of us here. So that's where the mall is. That's where the restaurants are. This just sat as kind of a backwater. And what I like about it so much is the village you see today is the village that was here in 1806 and 1808. Something that I think is of interest is the way the townspeople here, the village people, have developed a pride in their village. The town library, which is just beyond the town hall, is a lovely building. It's a wooden frame addition to an old stone storage shed that belonged to the Weston Mill. They saved the shed added the library onto it, and you have a very handsome building there today. There's an old picker shed down along the river that was falling apart when I first came here 4 years ago. The roof had caved in, the walls are falling in. They've restored that. The mill itself, the original mill built in 1806, burned down. The 1826 mill is there today. That's being restored. The Polytop Corporation and Dr. Harding are working to restore the mill and make it usable as a public building again. The bridge down below here was saved. They were going to widen that bridge for truck traffic. But that 1850 stone bridge was saved. They built a little wider sidewalk on it, and the truck drivers aren't too happy with it, I'm sure, but it still is the way the bridge was 140 years ago. So you've got a very historical center here that hasn't changed much in 90 years.
The difficult question we have before us is, how do you make people in your community aware of the specialness of their town? It's a tough one. But we're going to catch up with Dr. Bob Harding, who's Vice President of Slaterville River Properties, and how the folks in Slaterville have gone out of their way to make sure they capture what is special about Slatersville. Now, Dr. Harding, this particular manufacturing site, it's been in operation a long time.
That's for sure. And I think one of the points that seems to escape the attention of many people is that not only is it the first planned mill community in the nation, but there has been a continuity of employment here from various firms since it started in 1806. And during World War II, they made mosquito netting.
Oh, really?
In a recent visit with some of the older people who worked in this place up until 1954, they talked to me about a very memorable ceremony when they received the E for Excellence Award. They had a big ceremony out on that lawn over there. And matter of fact, the Oral History Project is something I've found to be very interesting, because we find there are people in this village who worked in this mill in the 50s before the Kendall Corporation left, and who are so connected to the village in this place because it has such a sense of place for them, that they gathered in a group meeting with maybe 75 or 80 of them, what we call Slatersville Homecoming, after we had some planning meetings and shared stories and so on. And we found out that the Kendall Corporation in those days, besides providing housing for its employees at unbelievable rates. I had one man in the group told me that his father had a tenement in a block house, and they took his rent out of his paycheck. It was 96 cents a week. On top of that,
96 cents
96 cents a week. And besides that, all the houses in those days had outhouses up and down Main Street and up and back here. The company even took care of cleaning out the outhouse on a monthly basis. We're finding that in the collection of people who have been identified who worked here in the 50s and before, there are, in a collection of about 75 people, there's probably 12 who are over 90 years old. And this granddaughter that I was mentioning, who is Dr. Lisa Harlow at URI in the psych department, whose specialty is in the psychology of meaning in people's lives, like logotherapy, has kind of proposed some hypotheses that when people have a sense of place and a sense of continuity in their lives with relationships of family and friends over long periods of time, it enriches their lives not only in their sense of enrichment, but actually prolongs their lives.
That's an incredible theory.
Unbelievable theory. And we'd love to be able to test that theory and prove it in a scientific way. That's part of what our oral history project is going to try to do. We found that by being open and sharing our plans with people, that we get more support than anything else and more help than anything else. We've had a block grant to do the windows in the weave shed. We've had grants to do engineering studies, grants from the Governor's Office of Housing and Energy, do an engineering study on hydropower and on cogeneration, which we're planning to do because we want to fight the high cost of electricity.
Absolutely.
We've got the town has been working with the Corridor Commission and the Department of Transportation to do a village plan. We're going to coordinate with our own plans.
You have talked about an amazing partnership of many different groups and individuals. And you've said it, even looking at the congressional support you've got.
Yep.
What do you think is the single thing that makes people say, this sounds like a project that I want to be involved in? What do you think is that single thread that seems to unite all the people about Slatersville?
I truly believe that a large part of it is the symbolism that comes from a mill like this mill that's in the picture, because it's been there, it's been in people's mind's eye for years and years. The bell used to ring at a regular time. It was part of the logo for the Kendall Corporation fabric. That, and also the idea that no one group, even though Polytop has been investing significant amounts of money in this subsidiary company, the fact that somebody is leading it, but it's preserving the values and the richness of the past without hindering the development of the future. We're kind of straddling the past and the future without turning our back. And I really think that people like that idea, and they like people being together with something rather than working against each other. I think people in general like cooperative approaches to things. And despite the fact that we're known as a competitive society, the fact is that things often work better when you work together than when you work against each other.
Now let's consider the possibilities here for a moment. In Blackstone, instead of something like this, perhaps we should try something like this. Or maybe even this. Or perhaps something along this line. And in Slatersville, maybe we can improve on this by doing something like this. You see, folks, lots of possibilities. Just open your mind. You know those old buildings in town that you don't know what to do with? Well, you can always bulldoze them out of existence. Or you can take a look at what makes your town unique and figure out how to promote and develop those buildings to reflect those characteristics. Now, I realize that the bulldozing out of existence is kind of extreme. But you know, you really don't have to change some of those buildings in town to take away those unique characteristics. For example, adding a 1970s Art Deco to the front of an old mill building really can change that significantly. We have a good friend of ours who's a colleague of ours in the National Park Service, Nancy Britton. She's a community planner. She's always looking for what's positive and find out what's important in town and then how to develop and promote it. And she thinks that the Blackstone Square, Monument Square in Blackstone, is an excellent example of an attractive place that we can utilize much more than it is. It's a well-defined square by the buildings that surround it. It's got a great picturesque view of the river and the dam, and right there in the center is a Civil War monument. It's a great place to take focus on what's unique about the town of Blackstone. And she thinks it's something that we can marketed and developed. Now, folks down in San Antonio, Texas did that with the Riverwalk. And right here in New England, Faneuil Hall is an excellent example of an economic development project that has really preserved a sense of history in downtown Boston. And it can be done here in Blackstone as well, or in any other community. The trick is to find out what makes your community unique and then run with it. And it's something that everybody can get behind. Now, I have a radical thought for you. I'm going to suggest you take some of your family or some of your buddies or loved ones and go exploring your hometown. Go figure out what's unique about it. Go down those old streets you haven't been down in years. Find out what's happening in your town. Look at the architecture. Look at the open spaces. Is it a concrete foundation? Is it a brick foundation? Is it a granite foundation? Which buildings are Victorian in nature? There's all kinds of discoveries you can do in your hometown, and you'll have a lot of fun, and you'll learn a lot. Now, I'm Chuck Arning, Park Ranger with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, and I'm heading out to get lost in the Blackstone Valley. Hey, I may just run into you.